I'm a simple guy, you know. I have a wonderful wife and two little kids. We live in the suburbs, in one of those quiet neighborhoods where you can leave your bike outside without worrying it'll get stolen. It's always been like that, at least until a few weeks ago. That's when this strange feeling started creeping in. At first, it was just small things you could brush off. Like I always lock the windows before bed. It's a habit. I go through the house and check each one by one. But suddenly, I'd wake up in the morning and one of the windows would be slightly open. I'd stand there, staring at it, trying to remember if I left it open or not. But I knew I'd closed it. It bothered me, but I tried not to overthink it. Then there was the garage door. One night, I locked it before heading to bed. I was sure of it. But the next morning, it was unlocked. That's when I started wondering if I was getting forgetful. Work, the kids, maybe it was just stress, right? Stuff like that happens. But still, that nagging feeling that something was off wouldn't go away. I felt like I was being paranoid, but you know that sense you get when something is more than it seems? Then came that night. It was late. Everyone was asleep. The house was completely silent. I was asleep too, until I heard a noise. And it wasn't just any noise. It wasn't the wind outside or the kids moving around in their room. It was a creaking sound like something shifting downstairs. At first, I tried to ignore it. I stayed in bed, eyes closed, convincing myself it was nothing, just my imagination. But then I heard it again, this time clearer. A creak, like the sound of a door or something heavy being moved, coming from the living room. I woke up completely. My heart was racing, and I thought, what the hell is going on? I got out of bed, trying to be quiet, you know? I crept down the stairs, feeling every step like the floor was shifting under me. When I reached the living room, nothing seemed out of place. I mean, everything looked normal, except for one thing. The curtains. They were swaying, just slightly, but enough for me to notice. Like someone had just brushed past them and left. That's when the real panic set in. I looked around. One of the windows, they were all locked. Checked the front door, locked too. There was no sign that anyone had come in. But man, I swear something was off. That feeling that someone or something had been in the room with me. I can't explain it, but it sent chills down my spine. I checked everything again before heading back to bed. And that night, I barely slept. The next morning, I was exhausted, barely getting any sleep after what happened in the living room. But what really got to me was my wife. While we were having breakfast, she mentioned something strange. She said that during the night, she felt like there was someone else in our room besides me. It wasn't a noise or a shadow she saw. Exactly. She said it was more like a presence, like someone was there watching us. My skin prickled again because I had my experience in the living room, but I hadn't told her about it. I just nodded, trying not to fuel the paranoia. I thought maybe it was just a bad dream or something. But the truth is, after hearing that, I started paying more attention. Every sound in the house, every movement felt different, like it all meant something. Then came the night when things got worse. I woke up again, but this time it wasn't a subtle creak. It was footsteps, clear, heavy steps, not light like the kids' steps. These were adult footsteps walking slowly down the upstairs hallway. The kind of sound that makes you sit bolt upright. I got out of bed fast and stepped into the hallway. The corridor was dimly lit by the light from the kids' room. I started walking toward the noise, my heart pounding, having no idea what I was about to find. And that's when I saw him. At the end of the hallway, standing in front of my kids' room, there was a man. He was just standing there, watching. He didn't move when he saw me, like he'd been expecting me to show up. He had his back to me, but the way he stood there so still was enough to freeze me for a second. My mind started racing. Who was this guy? How did he get into my house? And worse, what was he doing standing in front of my kids' room? I didn't think. I couldn't. My body moved on its own, and I charged straight at him. Fear turned to anger, and I rushed toward the guy. But before I could reach him, he vanished. Like smoke, he disappeared into the darkness of the hallway. I stopped dead in my tracks. The shock was so intense that I just stood there, trying to process what had just happened. How does someone vanish like that? I went to where he'd been standing, checked the entire hallway, the windows, the kids' room. Nothing. He was gone. That night was the longest of my life. I couldn't sleep after that. I locked the kids' room door, shoved a chair against our bedroom door, as if that would stop whatever it was from coming in again. But deep down, I knew that whatever it was, it had already been inside for a long time, and it was waiting for the right moment. The next morning, I was a wreck. There was no way I could sleep after that. My head was spinning with questions, and the worst part was I didn't have any answers. But what really scared me was knowing that it wasn't a dream. It wasn't my mind playing tricks. I saw that man. He was there standing in front of my kids' room. So I decided to call the police. When they arrived, I explained what happened, and the feeling that they weren't taking me seriously was suffocating. They asked routine questions, checked the whole house, but as I expected, they found absolutely nothing. No signs of forced entry, no footprints, nothing. I could see it in their faces. They thought I was overreacting, that it was just stress or paranoia. But I knew what I saw. I couldn't take the risk of letting this slide. So that same day, I installed cameras all over the house. In the living room, in the hallways, near the kids' room. If that guy came back, I'd have proof. Days went by, and although I felt a little safer with the cameras, that nagging feeling that something was wrong never left. Then, about a week later, things got worse. It was a Tuesday, and as usual, I was reviewing the camera footage before bed, just to make sure everything was normal. But when I got to the recordings from the past few nights, my heart practically stopped. At 2 a.m., for the past several nights, a man appeared on the footage. The same man I'd seen in the hallway. He walked slowly down the upstairs corridor, always stopping in front of the kids' room, just like I had seen that night. He stood there, motionless, for what seemed like an eternity. But the most terrifying part? He didn't touch anything, didn't make a sound, didn't open any doors or windows. He just watched. And the scariest part? It wasn't just once. He had been there for hours, night after night, while we slept, completely unaware. While we were sleeping, he was there, watching. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My mind scrambled to find a rational explanation, but there wasn't one. I saw it with my own eyes. He was there and always at the same time, in the same place, as if he was part of the house. I paused the footage over and over, zooming in on his face, trying to see more details, but no matter how hard I looked, what I saw made my skin crawl. It was him, the same guy I'd seen that night, standing in the dark, watching my home. I immediately called the police again, this time with the footage. They came quickly, but, as you might expect, by the time they arrived, the man had disappeared from the recordings of that night. That's when I realized something that chilled me to my core. This wasn't a normal break-in. It wasn't someone trying to get inside. He didn't need to break in. He was already here. Somehow, he had always been inside our home, watching us. And now, I knew he could come back at any moment. Since then, I've slept every night with a knife under my pillow, waiting for the moment when he'll show up again. And I know he will. It's just a matter of time. I was looking for a cheap place to live. Money was tight, and well, you know how it goes. You can't be too picky when you're on a budget. That's when I found this ad for a room to rent in an old house, a bit far from the city center. The price was absurdly low, almost too good to be true. But at the time, all I could think about was how much money I'd save, so I jumped on it. The house, man, I swear it looked like it came straight out of an old horror movie. It was kind of run down with those creaky wooden floors, peeling paint on the walls, and this musty smell that never went away, no matter how much you try to get used to it. The windows were old and dusty, barely letting in any light, which made the place feel even darker and more claustrophobic. But you know how it is, right? When you're desperate, any place will do. I just kept telling myself it was temporary, just until I saved up enough to move somewhere better. The landlady was an old lady. I don't remember seeing much of her when I first moved in. She lived on the ground floor, and I was upstairs with the other tenants who rented rooms. The weird thing was no one in the house talked to each other. Everyone kept to themselves, no interactions. It was almost like everyone had silently agreed to avoid each other. Now, about the old lady, every now and then, I'd hear a noise coming from downstairs, but I never saw her leave her room. She just stayed there locked away. She gave off this strange vibe, you know? But I didn't think much of it. I just wanted a place to crash at the end of the day and not get involved in anyone's problems. Then things started to get weird. One night, I was lying in bed reading a book, when I heard something. It was a very faint sound, almost imperceptible, like a whisper coming from the ceiling. At first, I thought it was just in my head, or maybe one of the other tenants walking upstairs, but it didn't really sound like that. It was soft but constant, like someone was having a secret conversation, except it didn't make sense. You ever get that feeling like you're hearing something you're not supposed to? It was exactly like that. I tried to ignore it, thinking it was just the old house, you know? Old houses make noises, they creak, they pop, that kind of thing. But over the next few days, the sound came back. Always at the same time, late at night, right above my room. I started to wonder if someone was going up to the attic, or if there was a tenant I didn't know about. But who would do that, and why? This started messing with my head. I tried to sleep, but I was always on edge, waiting for the sound to show up again. And every night, there it was. It was like something or someone was up there, making sure I knew I wasn't alone. I knew something wasn't right in that house, but I still had no idea what was coming. So yeah, the whispers continued, night after night. It got to a point where I just couldn't ignore them anymore. Have you ever heard something so many times that it starts to eat away at you, to mess with your mind? That's what was happening to me. The whispers stayed in my head even when they weren't there. Like I knew I was going to hear them again as soon as I laid down, and it was driving me kind of paranoid. One night, it was about 2 in the morning, the whispers came back. But this time, something was different. The sound didn't just seem like a distant conversation anymore. It sounded like someone was laughing, quiet, but you could hear it. It was this short, stifled giggle, and that really freaked me out. I sat up in bed, staying silent, listening closely, trying to figure out what the hell was going on up there. You know when you force yourself to listen more carefully, to try and catch something? That's exactly what I did. And I swear, man, for a second, I could have sworn I heard my name being whispered. That's when I really started to get nervous. I began to wonder if there was someone living in the attic that we didn't know about, someone spying on us, maybe even sneaking into our rooms while we slept. Just the thought of that made me too uncomfortable to keep ignoring it. I tried to think rationally. It could be one of the other tenants messing around in the attic, but why at that hour? And why whispering? It didn't make sense. Still, the next morning, I asked one of the guys living upstairs, but he looked at me like I was crazy. Said he hadn't been up in the attic and didn't know anything. I didn't want to be the weirdo in the house, so I let it go. But that doubt, that unease, only grew. The next night, when the whispers came back, I just couldn't ignore them anymore. My heart started racing. This time, it felt like the sound was coming from all around. It wasn't just the ceiling, it was like it was in the walls, moving. I didn't know what I was hearing anymore, and it was driving me out of my mind. That's when I decided I was going up there. I grabbed a flashlight and got ready to head up to the attic. Man, I was shaking, but I had reached a point where curiosity and fear mixed in such a way that I couldn't ignore it anymore. You know when you have to do something, even though you know you're probably going to regret it? Yeah, that was it. I needed to see what was going on up there, even though every nerve in my body was telling me not to. The attic stairs were retractable, the kind you pull down with a cord, and they come down slowly, creaking. The sound those stairs made only made me more tense. You know that heavy silence, where the air feels thicker, like something's watching you? I felt at the moment I pulled the stairs down. I climbed up slowly, each step creaking, and with every step, it felt like the whispers got stronger. Not louder, but more present, like they were surrounding me. The flashlight was shaking in my hand, and I tried to focus on what I was going to find up there. When my head reached the level of the attic, the first thing I saw was dust. Dust everywhere, like no one had been up there for decades. The wooden beams looked fragile, and the place smelled of rotting wood mixed with dampness. I almost regretted coming up, but now I had to finish what I started. The light from the flashlight moved slowly across the space, and that's when I saw it. On the floor, right in the middle of the attic, were several small holes carved with precision. They weren't accidental. They weren't caused by time or natural damage. Someone had made those holes on purpose, and each one of them was directly above the rooms of the tenants, including mine. Suddenly, everything started to make sense in my head. That's how the whispers sounded so close, like they were right there in the room. The person, whoever it was, had been using those holes to listen, to spy on us. I started to feel exposed, like I had been watched this whole time without even realizing it. My heart was pounding so fast I could barely breathe. And that's when the flashlight illuminated the darkest corner of the attic. She was there. The old lady, the landlady, was crouched in the corner, half hidden in the shadows. I swear she looked even skinnier and more hunched than I remembered, like time had done something horrible to her. She didn't say anything. She just sat there, staring through one of the holes, watching. For a second, I froze. I didn't know what to do. Didn't know if I should speak to her or just run. Then, out of nowhere, she whispered, without even turning her face, "I'm always here, watching." That was enough to make me scramble down those stairs as fast as I could. I barely remember how I got back to my room, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the flashlight. The next morning, I had my bags packed and got out of that house as fast as I could. I never told anyone what I saw, and I never went back to that place. But to this day, I wonder what else that old lady had been doing up there, what else she might have seen or done. I'm a security systems technician, and I've been doing this for so long that almost nothing surprises me anymore. Broken cameras, alarms going off for no reason, sensors picking up wind movement. I've seen it all. But that afternoon, I got a call that left me a little uneasy. It was a woman. She sounded nervous, talking fast, as if she was scared I'd hang up before she could explain the problem. She told me she lived in a huge, secluded house, and the internal camera system was acting up. The cameras would randomly turn off every night at the same time, for about 15 minutes. She wanted me to check it out. Okay, I thought. Common issue, probably just a technical glitch. Those internal cameras fail every now and then, no big deal. But man, her tone, I don't know, something wasn't right in her voice. It felt like more than just a technical problem, you know? The next day, I went to her house. And let me tell you, the place was weird. The house was massive, a real mansion, in the middle of a neighborhood hardly anyone knows about. The road there was lined with tall, thick trees that blocked out almost all the sunlight. The kind of place where, at night, you probably wouldn't want to be alone. When I got there, the woman met me at the door. She looked exhausted, with deep bags under her eyes, and that distant look typical of someone who hadn't slept well in a while. As soon as I stepped inside, I felt something off. I can't explain it, but you know when something feels out of place? It wasn't just the house, it was the whole atmosphere. She led me straight to the office where the monitor with the security footage was set up. The system seemed to be working fine when I arrived, nothing out of the ordinary. So I started reviewing the footage from the past few days. At first, everything looked normal. The cameras showed the living room, kitchen, hallways, standard stuff. But then, when I got to the early morning hours, something strange happened. Exactly at 3 a.m., like clockwork, the cameras began to flicker. One by one, they would shut off until none were left on. They stayed like that for 15 minutes, and then, just as suddenly, they'd come back on as if nothing had happened. Now, I've seen camera malfunctions before, but never like this. It was as if someone had programmed it. It was too precise, not the kind of thing that happens by accident. That already had me on edge, but what I saw next is what really creeped me out. One of the cameras, the one outside the house, had something odd going on. It was a fixed camera, shouldn't have moved. But during the 15-minute blackout, at exactly 3:02 a.m., this camera started slowly shifting. And it wasn't just a wobble or anything like that. It was moving deliberately like someone was controlling it. And do you know where it pointed? Right at the window of the homeowner's bedroom on the second floor. I paused the footage there and took a deep breath. Something was seriously wrong. I kept watching, and man, what I saw next gave me chills. In the reflection of the window, you could see a figure, tall, thin, standing right next to her bed. Still just watching. It was a clear, defined presence, not a shadow or tree reflection. It was someone, but when the system came back online 15 minutes later, the figure was just gone, as if it had never been there. At that moment, I knew this wasn't just a camera malfunction. There was something much more disturbing going on in that house, and I had just scratched the surface. After seeing that in the footage, I knew I had to show it to the homeowner. I called her over and said, "You need to see this. Something really strange is happening." I played the video back for her, step by step. I showed her the part where the cameras flickered and shut down, then the outside camera moving, which, to be honest, shouldn't have moved at all. Her face started to pale, But it was when I got to the part with the reflection in the window that things got tense. She went silent for a while, just staring at the screen. I could see her expression change, but it was hard to tell if she was more scared or in disbelief. What really struck me was that she was trying to rationalize what she was seeing. You know, when someone tries to convince themselves everything's normal, even when the evidence is right in front of them. That could be a shadow, right? A reflection from some tree or something. Her voice was trembling, but I knew it wasn't that. I've seen plenty of reflections on cameras over the years, and that wasn't an ordinary reflection. The figure had a defined shape, almost solid. It wasn't something you could explain away with strange lighting. I tried to reason with her, told her this wasn't something we could just ignore. I think you need to call someone. The police, maybe. There could be someone breaking into your house, somehow. But she just wouldn't believe it, or didn't want to. She kept shaking her head, muttering that this couldn't be happening, that it had to be some error with the footage or the camera itself. She was clearly scared, but at the same time, in denial. And me? I couldn't force her to make a decision, so I just gave her my advice and told her I'd keep an eye on things. I suggested that at the very least she should monitor the cameras that night and see if the same thing happened again. The idea was that she'd have something concrete to see with her own eyes, maybe change her mind. I left that house with a terrible feeling in my gut. I knew something was seriously wrong, and she just didn't want to face it. The worst part was, as I looked back at that huge house, surrounded by trees, I thought, if something happens in there, no one will know. The place was so isolated that anything could happen, and no one would hear a thing. That night, before bed, I kept thinking about everything I'd seen on those recordings. And that figure standing next to her bed, it bothered me in a way I couldn't explain. It wasn't just the fact that something was there, it was the way it seemed to be waiting. I kept wondering if that thing would come back that night, or if, somehow, it had already gotten inside without anyone knowing. That night, I barely slept. Something about the whole situation just kept gnawing at me. The woman had denied everything, but the image of that figure next to her bed wouldn't leave my mind. Something was seriously off. Then, out of nowhere, I got an emergency alert from her security system. Something had triggered the alarm, and I was automatically notified. I jumped out of bed, grabbed my car keys, and took off. The drive to her house felt longer and more agonizing than ever. And with each passing mile, I wondered what could be happening over there. I got there in about 20 minutes, and when I pulled up, I saw the lights upstairs were on. The place, which already gave me bad vibes before, now seemed even worse. Everything was silent, no movement outside. I grabbed my tools and entered through the front door, which was unlocked, just like the last time. As soon as I stepped inside, the silence in the house was suffocating. I climbed the stairs to her bedroom. The door was slightly open, and when I pushed it to see what was going on, I saw it. In the corner of the room, crouched in an odd position, was a man. He wasn't the tall, thin figure from the recordings, but rather a shorter guy with a sickly appearance. He was just there, watching her sleep, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. The woman was completely knocked out, unaware of what was happening. My heart was pounding, and I shouted as loud as I could, trying to wake her. It was only then that the man noticed me. He slowly turned his head and looked at me. His eyes were empty, unsettling, as if he wasn't really there. Without saying a word, he calmly stood up and walked out of the room, not running, not making a sound, like it was the most normal thing in the world. I woke her up, and she was in shock when she realized what had happened. We called the police right away, and when they arrived, they searched the house. The strangest part was there were no signs of forced entry, and the guy had just vanished. They searched the surrounding area, but found nothing. The police later discovered that the man was one of her neighbors, someone who had apparently been watching her for a long time. The most disturbing part is that he had been there, crouched, watching her sleep, as if it was part of his routine. And that security system? Even with all the cameras, no one knew how he'd gotten in. But what haunts me the most is that the man who showed up that night wasn't the same figure from the recordings. I still wonder what the hell that figure was,